and to Newswatch, or Hypocrite Watch Special Edition. Speaking of, don't miss the last example I'll give tonight. Anyway, the hate on men now, as if only men are bullies and mean. Today, again on the ABC, same story this time. Labor Party elder calls for end to impunity for misbehaving men. And they had former Deputy Labor leader Jenny Macklin accusing men of making Parliament toxic for women.
Enough is enough. We've got to call it out, deal with the abuse that does take place, make Parliament House a safer place for particularly the women who work there and the women MPs, and encourage young women to come into Parliament. It is time to also put in place mechanisms, structural changes, so that it is a safer place to work, and also to really make sure that those men who are responsible for this abuse are held accountable.
Yes, let's make these terrible male politicians accountable for their bullying. No mention of making women accountable, like, I don't know, Green Senator Lidia Thorpe, maybe? I mean, she too has long had a thing about, men.
The old white fellas that are laughing and heckling me in the background, they're the problem with this country. Patriarchy is violence and colonialism is violence.
Lidia Thorpe. Well, this is the same Green Senator that we today read is accused of verbally abusing an Aboriginal elder in Parliament. Victorian activist Geraldine Atkinson, a woman in her 70s, who says Thorpe treated her so badly in a meeting that she had to leave the room and get attention. She said, Thorpe spoke over the top of me in a highly aggressive tone, repeatedly stating, "I am an Australian senator, you are in my meeting." Thorpe again aggressively spoke over the top of me, she said, saying that I am being very well paid in my work. When I retorted that she too was being well paid, she interrupted me and became even more aggressive, stating that she doesn't respect me and would not meet with me again. Well, joining me on Newswatch is Sophie Elsworth, media writer for The Australian. Sophie, thank you for your time. Now listen, I tell you, if I yelled at and intimidated and insulted and talked over an Aboriginal elder, so much so that she had to flee the room to get some help, how do you think that would play on the ABC?
Oh, I think that would make headlines everywhere, Andrew. I mean, people would just be absolutely going for you if that was to happen. But this story isn't nearly as appealing to the leftist feminist activists out there when a woman is bullying a woman or allegedly bullying. They were all quiet today on Twitter. They weren't calling this out and saying this type of behaviour, right, if it is true, is disgusting. They're all silent. So women apparently don't really bully women. I mean, this whole gender divide, it's men versus women. All men, basically, Andrew, according to these leftist activists and feminists, are disgusting human beings. I mean, it's just absurd. And I will say, in my career, some of the experiences I've had with women are far worse than with men. There's been some wonderful men I've worked with who've been incredibly supportive, great mentors. I can't say the same for all women. Some women on women are the worst.
Well, it's a bit of the mean girls routine from school, I guess. I don't know. But so, Sophie, so you're spoiling my happiness, because you're suggesting that I should not be waiting for the ABC to now do similar stories on how women are creating a toxic culture in Parliament and women must be made accountable. That's not going to happen, you're saying?
Absolutely not. I mean, that's a boring story that would barely make a page lead in a newspaper, nor an article on a 6 p.m. news bulletin, Andrew. It's just not juicy enough, really. We love these stories that are men being disgusting towards women. And a lot of them are unfounded claims, allegations that are never proven. And to be honest, Andrew, if I was a male in Parliament, I would be concerned because it just seems to be this hatred out there to bring men down and make men look bad. And I can say that there's a lot of experiences of women out there, of other women being awful to them, but we just don't hear of these.
Now, one reason I too think that Thorpe is going to get away with the nastiness again is that it doesn't fit the media story like we've been discussing. But I'm going to give you another example here, Sophie, how only certain things that fit the agenda get the label, get the attention. It's the media's use of the label divisive. Here's David Crowe, political writer for the Sydney Morning Herald, using the word divisive on the ABC just this morning to describe Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce.
I think there's a big risk for the Nationals that voters will recoil from Barnaby Joyce going too far. He's certainly divisive, we know that.
Now, Sophie, what does the word divisive really mean? Because I think that was a perfect example of it being used on the left about a Conservative.
Well, as you said, Andrew, it fits the agenda nicely there. But I would use the word divisive, which effectively means splitting up the room, as describing our very own Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews. I mean, there couldn't be a more divisive Premier that we have in this country, but we don't hear that description of Premier Daniel Andrews. We've got other politicians out there that are divisive, in Christina Keneally being one. We've had other politicians that are on the
blackboard. Nails on a blackboard.
I mean,
look, Christina Keneally, every time she speaks, I'm sure that Labor loses votes.
Oh, absolutely. I think every time she speaks, the coalition are cheering in the background, going, keep going, Christina, because it's a good look for them. I mean, she just splits the room every time. And we will see this with Premier Daniel Andrews back running the place. He's only been back a day and he's already causing division amongst people. You know, we can tolerate characters such as James Merlino, but now we have someone like Premier Daniel Andrews back. Why aren't we calling people like that divisive, Andrew? Barnaby Joyce, divisive, we scream. But then when we're describing the leftist politicians, we don't touch the word.
No, I think divisive is usually retained for use against Conservatives who challenge leftist agendas. Barnaby Joyce, Tony Abbott, George Pell, me, that kind of thing. And, my opinion is, sometimes people do use division to try and carve off a niche for themselves. I mean, Adam Bant, the Greens leader, perfect at that. Or sometimes it's simply the case of someone expressing an opinion clearly enough, and with every opinion now, you're always going to get people disagreeing with you, and that's called divisive. Actually, I call it debate, I call it argument, whatever. Sophie, last night we covered your story about John Fain, the former ABC presenter. He was picked by Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews, who you mentioned, to do the big interview with him for The Age about his return. And so he sat down with Daniel Andrews, did the big piece, and The Age said, no, we're not going to run this because we decide who does our interviews for us. The Premier doesn't decide that. And Andrews told them, well, in that case, no interview. Fain then chopped his interview to the ABC. It also said no, interview wasn't newsworthy. What's the latest on this?
So the reports out today, Andrew, on this state that John Fain will be paid by the ABC. It's unclear how much he'll be paid, but he'll be paid for this interview that won't see light of day. Now, I asked the ABC this yesterday, specific questions. One of the questions was, will John Fain be paid, yes or no? And I got crickets, Andrew. They would not answer the question. Why isn't the public broadcaster answering basic questions? It is our taxpayers' money that is paying for this work, but we're not allowed to know if we are paying for it or not. It's a big secret. And don't forget, John Fain is also the brains trust behind the state government's propaganda campaign last year with those ads featuring Magda Skabansky. We still don't know how much he was paid for that either. And I would be, if I was Daniel Andrews, asking John Fain to interview me because I'd be getting a wonderful, glowing piece. I mean, why would he want Neil Mitchell interviewing when he's going to ask the tough questions? It's crazy.
Look, just in fairness to John, I might be wrong, but I vaguely recall him once saying that he didn't get paid for that arranging that series of interviews that touted the Victorian government's campaign, stay at home and all that. But whatever, the point is, this is a man right on side with the left, right on side with the government on the virus approach. So why wouldn't Daniel Andrews pick exactly him to do his puff piece for him? Anyway, there you go. Sophie Elsworth, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Andrew.